So I've been adhering to a rule when it comes to the backgrounds of these things. I actually purchased a fairly large number, about 50 or so of these things, and the idea was to never cycle them. But by which I mean, I didn't want to have one right next to another, right next to another, the same background. I wanted something relatively different. So I've been varying it up, and I have this whole system of, this one's been used recently, this one's been used recently, and so forth and so on, and then I cycle it back around, just keeping the thread going, right? I've also been trying to use backgrounds that I felt were relevant to the episode in some way, thematic or emblematic of it. However, very recently, today actually, by my perspective, which is about a month and a half ago from your perspective, I got a complaint about one of the backgrounds I was using, specifically for one of the Babylon 5 videos. In fact, I got multiple complaints about it. And I've decided, after some thought, I'm going to go ahead and stop doing that. Completely new system when it comes to the television backgrounds. I may buy some more if I can find some good ones. I don't know. But what we're going to do instead is we're going to keep things thematic. What I mean by that is Babylon 5 is just going to be the snowy backgrounds, of which I have about 7 or so. So you're going to see the same 7 or so backgrounds loop, and if that gets too old or boring, well, then that sucks, and we'll have to reevaluate when we get there, but that's going to be the idea. And then when we start TNG and DS9 later this year, we'll be doing like one set of backgrounds, probably the space ones for TNG, and then probably either the snow ones or the water ones for DS9. Probably the snow ones for DS9. And that's how we'll do it from now on. And we'll stop using those other backgrounds, and I've kind of shunted those off into the never used category, of which I've already put a couple because there were some issues with that. Okay, now that we've gotten that out of the way. I also want to say something really quickly. This is the first episode I have sat down and recorded since Stephen first died. And that sucks. And I don't have anything really big or epic or grand. I'm not Jakar. I can't do some amazing speech. All I can say is that it sucks. And it was not pleasant to hear. I urge you to go to YouTube, which you're probably on right now, statistically speaking, and look up Stephen First, how he got the role of Veer. And it's a convention, and he tells the story of how he got the job. And it's nice, and it's heartwarming, and it's a good way to remember him by. Let's talk about Season 5. God, where do I even begin? Season 1 of Babylon 5 is something that is almost universal when it comes to B5 fans, I've noticed. The specific details vary, but most people tend to agree on a general consensus of, you should still watch it, but it's less quality. It's the stuff you should go through to get the proper background, the setting building, the character development, and all of the investment you need to understand so that when Season 2, 3, and 4 go, you get it. And you have that full, oh, this is why this is happening, and oh my god, this was all the way back then, kind of a thing as you're going through the rest of the series. And by and large, at least 95% of the Babylon 5 fans I talk to agree on a general consensus when it comes to Season 1 of that. Me personally, I actually rather like Season 1. It certainly has its stinkers, as I talked about when we were going through it, but I feel that Season 1 works much better the second time through, when you can really spot what they were working on and what they were doing. Season 5, by contrast, I have never heard a consensus on. Season 5 is one of those, some people hate it, some people love it, some people both, some people say you should flat out skip it. I have actually heard people recommend that you go through Season 1 through 4, and then you watch In the Beginning, which we did yesterday, and then you do, oh god, I can't remember the name of the episode. It's the one that was originally the Season 4 ender. It's the one that is the Season 5 ender. And skip all of Season 5 in between. Just do like this. And that's how you should watch Babylon 5. And if I'm being 100% honest, I kind of could see the reasoning behind that. I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't go through Babylon 5 Season 5, but I can understand why certain people would want to basically skip it. That being said, I'm not going to give my opinion of Season 5 yet, because we haven't gone through it with analysis mode on. I am going to be giving my opinion on Season 5 as we go through it. I will say this, by memory, I tend to skip a lot of these episodes, and overall I tend to find Season 5 to be generally less quality than Season 2, 3, and 4. Kind of like Season 1, actually. But unlike Season 1, it does this. Like, there are some really good episodes in Season 5. And then there's some ones where I just kind of go... So, we'll get there as we get there, and we'll see what we think of it this time around. I am, in all honesty, genuinely curious what my opinion will be going through Season 5 with analysis mode on. Speaking of Season 5, let's talk about Claudia Christian. I did a lot of research for this. Like, more than I usually do. It's actually part of a thing more recently. I've been trying to be more in-depth, more thorough. Admittedly, this is partially in preparation for TNG, because there's so much information on TNG, and I'm going to have to go through all of it, or rather, I have decided I want to go through all of it to do as in-depth of a rumination as I can on all the episodes. But, so I actually went out, and I wrote down the name of this because it's the dumbest book name ever. It's called Babylon Confidential, a memoir of love, sex, and addiction. I probably have already given away my opinion of that book, but I actually went out and bought that book, a ebook version of it, because it was cheaper, and read through the whole thing in preparation for this, which is funny because it's probably going to take me like 5 minutes to talk about it. But I really wanted to see what she had to say about her experience at Babylon 5. Now, for those of you who don't really understand why this is a big deal, Claudia Christian was no longer with the team, is no longer on Babylon 5, in between Season 4 and Season 5. Now, I phrase that very particularly because even right now, I can't actually tell you with 100% certainty any of the particulars of that. I have read her articles and her interviews. I have read the interviews from JMS. I have read the interviews from Bruce Brox-Leitner. I have watched interviews from JMS at conventions. And, of course, I read her book, where she talks about that, among other things. And having gone through all that, I have an opinion on what I think happened, but I don't have a fact to give you. So I'm just going to lay that out right up front. Don't know the truth, okay? It's also worth noting that a lot of these stories directly contradict each other. In fact, Claudia Christian's story and JMS's story are so contradictory that they cannot exist within the same reality. One of them is mistaken, misleading, or lying. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. They're non-congruent. God, where to begin? One of the things that was brought up repeatedly by her is that she wanted to keep doing more, and she was interested in doing more, and she was asking for little things, basic, mundane things. Again, I'm not going to go into detail, because I don't want to sit here for forever talking about Claudia Christian, but she sat down and was like, okay, I wanted this. I was going to go work on this other thing. I had started becoming, a bigger career. I wanted to go into movies. But I was totally on board with Season 5, and I definitely wanted to keep doing that. And they were refusing to allow me to have what I needed, like written consent or the allowance to have certain time off. Which is funny, because certain interviews of her say she wasn't allowed the time off, and some say she was allowed the time off. And then because of these conflicts of interest, she was fired from Warner Brothers, fired from TNT, and said, okay, I'll go on and do my own thing, and started her movie career, which kind of went nowhere, and do her own thing. That's the first thing I wanted to start with, is that's basically her side of the story. Bruce's side of the story is that she was offered the same fairly cushy deal. It's called a most favored nation deal, I believe. The general gist of that is, let's say you're hiring 5 people, and one of them you're going to give these benefits, these promises, and this salary. In that kind of a clause, everyone gets that, because that's the highest one. In other words, everyone's benefits raised to the level of the person at the top. Make sense? So in other words, everyone was going to get the same benefit. So Bruce was talking about this, and how he was actually pissed at the situation because she had taken that and said, no, and just walked off of it. He talks a little bit more in a few other details, but it boils down to the fact that Bruce felt like she had flat out betrayed them because she got greedy. I'm not sure I agree with that, But let's talk about JMS, because here's the interesting thing. I mentioned earlier we don't know the truth, and I can only give you my opinion. Claudia Christian, and especially in her book, which I'll talk about more in just a second, is very soap opera-y. I'm not straight up calling her a liar, but it certainly seems like the kind of thing that feels more scripted to make it sound more dramatic than what actually happened. Because real life actually tends to be a fairly mundane thing most of the time, believe it or not. Bruce's thing, that sounds like he had only a window of the picture, and he was pissed off because he felt like she had betrayed him and them. Also, Bruce had actually gotten along quite well with Claudia up until this moment. JMS's response is to cite facts and... I don't know how to put this. He has a very professional way of addressing the situation. For example, one of the things that was being contested was a particular of SAG rules that, maybe the... God, I actually don't feel like getting into it. There's a whole concept of residuals and how residuals work based on different tiers of television. I don't even know if this is true anymore, but it used to be true based on networks or syndication, all that fun stuff. Point being, under those rules, there's a certain amount of money that's allotted, and then under SAG rules, that money then starts going back to the actors at a certain residual, hence the term. And under these, so one of the things that Claudia had said was that she wasn't getting offered enough money, or that she wasn't being allowed this, and no, this was happening here, and this was happening here, the same deal was offered, because it literally has to be. That's how the SAG, SAG is the Screen Actors Guild, sorry, which is pretty much the legal organization that governs how Hollywood in general works, both in television and in movies. Mostly in television. It's much bigger influence in television for the most part. You can't violate that stuff, or they will come after you and either force you to fix it, go after you legally, or shut you down. You can't go against the SAG, at least here in the States. And people who have tried to do so have had issues. So that's an invalid complaint, at least if all of this information is correct. He would also cite information regarding, timing, the specific particulars of what was going on, their assurances. See, according to JMS, she kept telling them, yes, I want to do season 5. And they were like, cool. And she hadn't done certain things in writing, basically. She hadn't gone through the red tape in order to be on board with that. Again, SAG is kind of involved with that. And it was like, okay, no problem. And they went to Warner Brothers, and they went to TNT and said, yeah, no, she's cool. And then when the deadline came, because there is a hard deadline for paperwork, it came and then it went. And she hadn't done it. So by literal action, she had decided not to come back to season 5. So JMS's story is that she's the one who basically didn't show up to work one day. To pull the parallel down to something that most of us probably can understand better. I mean, if you have a 9-to-5 job, and I know, I've had a 9-to-5 job for most of my life, actually. You just don't show up to work one day, and you don't explain it, and you don't do anything, you're probably fired. You might be able to talk your way out of that, but you're probably fired, right? It's kind of what happened, according to JMS's story, which, of course, contradicts her story. You get the point. Now I want to talk about that book. I kind of wish I hadn't read it, because, in my opinion, it was a bunch of drivel and garbage. I'm just going to say that as bluntly as I can. That's why I preface that with opinion. If you like that book, that's great. But it felt like some of the most neo-new age, just, oh man, kind of thing. And again, I mentioned the soap opera thing. It was, okay, I'm one of those people who is very dramatic, even in real life. I mean, this whole moving my hands thing, gesticulating, kind of a thing, that is actually how I behave in real life. That is me. That's not an act or an airs or anything like that. But I tend to not drip over into melodrama, which, to define it, drama is, oh, God, I just stubbed my toe. And melodrama is, oh, no, with this toe stubbed, this is truly one of the worst things that could ever happen to me. Oh, woe my life, my toe, once further unstubbed, but now is stubbed, lo, in lament. That's melodrama. And it felt a little melodramatic, the overall tone of her book. She also talks about a few things which I think are outright fabrications. I, of course, have no proof of this, but the overall presentation does not seem to cohese with what I would call reality. Most notably, at one point, she accused JMS of basically trying to come onto her and date her, and her being wigged out about that. She also claimed to be very, shall we say, romantically active within Hollywood at the time. Now, all of that being said, I don't want to come down too hard on Claudia Christian, because I have a very strong feeling that this is related to her issues at the time, which I'm actually not going to go into detail of, out of respect. If you feel like digging into her past, that's your business, not mine. I only did this for the show. I have a feeling that what happened was a little bit more mundane than we think. I think that in her mind at the time, she had every intention of doing Season 5, but thanks to issues, and thanks to the way things were going for her at the time, it didn't line up right. Like, it wasn't a, I don't go to work one day because screw work. It was more of a, oh God, I was supposed to go to work yesterday, kind of a thing. And that just kind of led to things happening the way they happened. And then she had to save face, and, pride comes in there, anger comes in, all this stuff. The bottom line is Claudia Christian bailing, for lack of a better term, on the show was not an amicable parting. There's no disagreement on that part. Unlike, oh God, I suddenly can't think of his name. The guy who played Sinclair, who we've talked about before, and there were some issues regarding that, and there was a very great understanding of why he had to bow out of the show. This was something that no one planned for, that no one wanted. Like, near as I can tell, no one involved actually wanted this to happen. And then there was a scramble to make up for it. And so we have Lockley instead. Now, Lockley, I don't want to talk about too much today, because honestly, she's barely present in the episode, and her, if you could call it that, character arc won't even really start until like the 3rd episode or so. But that makes sense, because all of a sudden here's this new character, and weren't really planning on doing stuff with her. For an example of this, and I hate to parallel Babylon 5 to DS9 again, but look at Worf's first few episodes over on DS9. He's just kind of there, because they weren't really planning for him to be there when they were working on those episodes. And a lot of pre-work before you go in front of the camera happens to go into an episode, so they just were like, and then insert Worf into the scene, because they'd already done all the scripting, all the blocking, all the set design, etc. Or the set setup, excuse me, not set design. Obviously they had the sets already ready to go. This brings me to my next point. TNT. I don't know what your opinion of TNT is right now. I'm talking about the news network, or excuse me, the news network. Sorry, the media network, not the explosive. I don't want to know what your opinion of TNT, the explosive, is. I mean the channel. I don't know what your opinion of this, but my opinion of them has pretty much been high for about the last 2 decades. That's an exaggeration. It's like the last 15 years or so, because of the fact that they saved Babylon 5. Now, this is something that needs to be taken into historical account as well as modern. Obviously, Season 1 through 4 already were done and locked in and ready to go. So it's not like they saved the best of Babylon. It's not like the amazingness, the incredibleness of this fantastic show wouldn't have happened if not for TNT. But a lot of people wouldn't have been exposed to this show if not for TNT. It wouldn't have received the kind of fan base it has to this day. There are conventions still going, as of this year, where there are people from Babylon 5 hanging out on stage and being like, hey, what's up? Because of TNT, because of how they spread Babylon 5. Because previously, Babylon 5 was on a network, I don't even remember the name of it, it's like PTEN or something like that, which we got, with the antenna kind of a situation, right? Instead of a major network. TNT picked Babylon 5 up and said, yeah, we'll take you. And it is worth noting that the other way TNT saved Babylon 5 is they allowed them to have a 5th season. Pretty much everyone was quite certain that there was going to be no Season 5. I've kind of already talked about this, and my belief on how Season 4 was truncated as a result of the absence of Season 5. Because we do know that JMS originally had a 5-season Bible when he was originally designing Babylon 5. But everyone had given up. It was over. It was the end. Okay, Babylon 5, Season 4 is done, now what? Nothing. Okay. Well, we had a good run, guys. Faith endures, etc. But then, TNT swoops in pretty much at the last minute. Like, it was within, I'd say days, this is an estimation, days of when it would have been too late to actually be able to have a Season 5 properly come out. But the really important thing is when they came out with Season 5, they didn't just do that. They picked up the show, gave it a good slot, and started re-showing the old episodes. TNT started spreading Babylon 5. And so then when Season 5 came out, they did these little shorts. They did little videos where, they had Bruce Boxleitner and the others come out and just talk about the show, introducing people to it. Because remember, it didn't have a lot of exposure back then. The only reason I even knew about Babylon 5 when it was coming out was because I was a geek who ran in geek circles back then. A lot of convention scenes, a lot of message boards and the internet. And so Babylon 5 came to my awareness, and you see where this goes? And and there were several of us, of course, several thousand or several million or however many of us, but it wasn't that big of a market share. TNT started being like, hey, look, there's this new show. There's this new show. And they basically marketed it as if it was a new show. It received the full backing and funding of what would effectively be a premiere. And then when Season 5 finally came out, they were pushing that as well. And so a lot of Season 5, especially these first few episodes, you'll notice, act as if you've never seen this show before. And that's why. Because they need to make sure that the people who hadn't have somewhere to go with it. Now, I've talked before about the idea of you shouldn't try to bring in new players with the third game in a trilogy thing, and I'm sure some of you know what I'm talking about. But this was a little bit of a different situation. Because in this case, it was more of a, hey, you might be new to the series, but also here's the rest of the series, and you should totally get into it. But if you want to stick around for the new stuff, it'll be coming out, and here's this and all that kind of thing. It was a little bit of a different approach. It was also a different approach because, again, Babylon 5 wasn't popular. It was made popular by TNT. I digress. So let's actually get to the episode proper finally. I know, we've just been rambling about the production of television and the era of the times and all that. But let's actually talk about the episode. As I mentioned, a lot of info dumping at the beginning. I don't actually have that much to talk about the episode proper. That's the funny part. It's kind of a standard episode, and that's the point. This is just another day in the life of B5. It deals with some of the fallback of Season 4, because continuity is a big important thing to Babylon 5. It works on some character stuff, because character-centric stories are a big part of B5, but that is effectively it. Let's talk about the political situation here, first of all. Now, the Alliance is brand new. Like, weeks, I think, at this point, old. Possibly not even that old, depending on when you call it the official ratification. Sheridan hasn't even been sworn in as president of the Alliance yet. That's actually what happens in this episode. And if I may, just as a quick aside, I love that final scene where Jakar's like, okay, look, do you want to be president or not? Put your hand to the book. Say I do. All right, let's go eat. I love that. So, all right, you're president. Let's go. Let's go. But this organization is very new, and Babylon 5, the station, is something that needs to be dealt with, because we're not actually sure where it lies on the political spectrum. It was a pretty much universally Earth-centric military outpost that happened to have a neutral port of call inside that military outpost as a way of encouraging trade and interaction with other races. Then it was no longer an Earth outpost, but it was still a military outpost. Then it was a point of rebellion and also a command center against the Shadow World. Let's not forget that. And just all this other fun stuff. And then finally the resurrection's over, the insurrection is over. The fighting is done. They come back, and now it's like, now what? You know what a political marriage is, right? I find it interesting because this is probably one of the most This is probably one of the first times I've seen Sheridan be very politically adept. Is he specifically chooses an Earth alliance, someone who is still signed up with EarthGov's military, as the military commandant of Babylon 5. It's a political marriage. It is literally, that is figuratively what it is. It is one step away from being literal for reasons that will be revealed later. Her being brought on board makes a lot of sense, Now we show that there is a connection between us. Your commander is leading our station and is being given such authority, although the political authority still lies under the sway of the Alliance. Ergo, our fates are now intertwined, and we have a greater chance of cooperating and interacting with each other. This is also especially important since right now, a lot of the non-aligned, excuse me, I shouldn't call them aligned worlds anymore, a lot of the alien races, the non-human races, don't have a huge amount of trust in the human government right now for fairly obvious reasons. I don't even think I need to point out. Never mind a lot of lack of faith in humans in general, given how much support the Clark regime had thanks to the entire policy of anti-alien bias. So showing this was a great gesture on behalf of Sheridan. Also, she does seem to pretty much fit the bill. Note one nice little thing is when she stands up and says, "No, I want full authority of this station," he's actually smiling. The camera cuts to him and shows him smiling as she's standing up to him. It's a nice touch, and I like that. And then he, of course, compromises with her. Funny little fact, there's actually tons of little compromises throughout this episode. It's like, okay, I will never do this. Okay, I'll do this. You know, the boy talks. Franklin is willing to give them the medical care without pay. He is willing to reach out to her. Delenn and Sheridan are willing to share quarters, you know, et cetera, et cetera. There's actually compromises all over the place in this episode. It's kind of funny. Also, there's oranges in the scene. Just nice touch. Anyways, so we have our political alliance. Woo! Also, I'm sorry, really quick. Another nice little touch. There's still Narn on the security teams. I love little details like that. It's one of the things I love most about recurring fiction, like television, or a series of games, or a series of movies. You have little details in the background that show, hey, those things that happened, they actually happened, and they still have some relevance. I've spoken so many times about how much I love continuity, how I am a continuity hound. But as I've said before, there's many types of continuity. This is basically setting continuity, is what's happening here. And it just makes it more investment. It makes it feel more like the things that happen actually matter, because they actually happened and still have impact later. But I digress. Just a nice touch. So then G'Kar is selected to write the code of morals, for lack of a better term, of the Alliance. First of all, perfect choice. And what's funny is I imagine a lot of us, the viewers, agree with Sheridan's in-character statement of how G'Kar is just fantastic when it comes to speechifying. On the fly, it's worth noting. Now, obviously, G'Kar, the character, was reading from Andreas Katsulas was reading from a script. But G'Kar, in character, was just saying a lot of that on the fly. And so Sheridan's like, yeah, no, dude, you're the perfect choice. And I agree. I would totally want G'Kar to write, like, if I was to conquer the world, which will never happen, Operation Bellhammer, I would want G'Kar to be my speechwriter and be like, look, I mean, obviously, I can't because he's not real, but that would be awesome, wouldn't it? Anyways. So I'm going to skip ahead of my notes just a little bit here. Most of the rest of this I don't have a lot to say about. I want to talk about the Byron. By the way, did you know that Byron is played by Robin Atkin Downes? I actually didn't know that. I've never seen him. And his voice kept kind of making me go, eh. If you don't know who Robin Atkin Downes is, he's played a lot of characters. He's one of those voice actors, he is predominantly a voice actor, who plays mostly the background characters, but does it very well, which is actually a very valued asset when it comes to voice acting that a lot of people don't really value as much as they should, I feel. That's one of the things BioWare used to be very good at, for example. Most of you probably would recognize him either as Luxord from the Kingdom Hearts series, or probably a little more likely you might know him as the medic from Team Fortress 2. But trust me, he's done a lot of lines. You've probably heard his voice at some point. Anyways, this was actually his first acting role I could find credit for, by the way, as Byron. And he sucked at it. I'm sorry. He was so bland and so boring and so disinteresting. I kept watching for some shade of emotion or some variance in his tone, especially since he is a good voice actor, at least now. I'm like waiting for him to do something, and it's like, I am very excited that you have done this. He likes you. He always... It's zombie mode the whole time. Maybe that was the intent? Maybe that was the direction, but it came across as very flat. I'll talk more about Byron right now. So Byron is wonderfully ironic of a character. He is someone who in no way wants to threaten others, and as a byproduct of his beliefs and the commitment to those beliefs, he is horrifically threatening to others. And this is the kind of thing that happens in real life, too. See, here, let me run you through this here, okay? A pacifist telepath group, a pacifist telepath is not really a threat. I mean, there are certain things that can go wrong with that, and most of those are more political, so not really a huge threat. A pacifist telepath group is a horrific threat. I can tell you that even if I hadn't already seen this show, or they didn't have the little teaser thing back in Deconstruction of Falling Stars, or was it Rising Stars? God, I don't even remember. The episode we just covered last week. What you have here is a recipe for disaster. Telepaths are already dangerous and maligned by certain groups and controlled by certain groups, right? So if you have a group of telepaths, again, a group, not an individual, of telepaths, break off and say, hey, we're going to be over here now. This is now a threat. Not because they threaten your ideology or your philosophy or your political agenda, although those are all things too, but because they are now a flag. And the moment you have a flag, you become possible to be used. Someone could join that group saying, oh yes, pacifist, pacifist, and then use that, and either have the mental blocks or the capacity to present pacifism, and then use it to present a militaristic or violent tint. Ergo, just to name an example right off the top of my head, let's say someone decided to take, you know what, I don't want to get into real life politics, it just occurred to me. Let's not do that. Let's use Jakar. Let's use a totally fictional example. Let's say someone was like, I'm going to murder all of these Narn who capitulated to the Centauri in the name of Jakar. Now, do you think Jakar wants that? No, of course he doesn't. But Jakar has stopped being a person and become a flag at that point. And you see how the parallels work here. It even gets worse than that, because it's also possible that someone who is not manipulative, but instead simply weak, can therefore do something. Let me explain what I mean by this. Let's say 10 people join this pacifist movement, and all 10 of them are committed to it. But then so there's some incidents and there's some accidents, and they start getting a little bit pissed, and one of them, because it only takes one, decides to go and stab, or spike, or whatever, right? Pull out a PPG and shoot a psychop, for example. All of a sudden, the flag has committed an act of violence against the psychops. What do you think that means? You see how they immediately become a threat? As an organization, as a group, as a flag. Because now, the flag has committed the act, not the individual. Nobody's going to look at that and say, oh, that guy was just an outlier. On the off chance that you manage to convince people that he was an outlier, there's going to be concessions, there's going to be discussions, there's going to be mistrust, and now the already tenuous piece, which was tenuous to begin with, is much more frayed and much worse, and now it's going to require an even less of a spark for it to go away again. One person could just be upset and yell at a psychop, or punch one, or have a psychop yell at them, or punch one of them, provoking them in return. In many ways, this is actually a Horde and Alliance situation. As much as I rant about that, there's a good reason why those two organizations are not at peace, and it's because they're organizations. It's too easy for someone who is perceived or is a member of one side or the other, a member of one of the flags, to get involved in a violent altercation, politically or literally. And once you do that, the flag is called to task for it, not the person. And you might be like, well, hang on, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Well, let me explain something else. And they do a good job of showcasing this in the episode. I've actually talked about this before, and I don't remember where, forgive me. So, forgive me for the repetition. It's the vesting concept, vouching, if you prefer. I trust, I'm going to make up names because I don't feel like going into real life stuff. I trust Bob, okay? Bob's great. He's the best guy ever. This guy I just made up. Let's say I trust Bob. Like, I really do trust him. I vouch for Bob. So at that point, anything Bob does is my fault, because I vouched for him. However, that's not a problem, because I do trust Bob, and he has earned that trust. You with me? Let's say Bob brings in 3 people. Bob vouches for all of them. Well, I have vouched for Bob. Ergo, I have extended my vouch to these 3 people. However, I am not Bob. So what I consider to be trustworthy is not what Bob considers to be trustworthy. Ergo, we are one step away from it now. Now let's say any of those people vouch for someone. And you can see how this extends. The whole process of vouching, the whole process of saying, oh yes, they haven't flat out say in the episode, do you speak for all of these people? The moment you say yes, you are taking upon yourself and your flag the responsibility of everyone under it. And it gets easier the further out it extends for someone to get just a little bit further away from what you, the originator, would consider trustworthy. It's kind of another variant of the A to Z concept that I've talked about with regards to villainy. It doesn't take much for an A to vouch for a B, but an A vouching for an M, well, that's a little bit of a different matter. But if A vouches for B, vouches for C, etc., etc. You see? This is why Byron is a threat. Because he is not just a pacifist who is acceptant of the idea of being a pacifist. He insists on being a flag. He wants to have an organization. He wants to have a new way of life. He wants to help people. He has ambition. And he is unwilling to let go of that ambition. And I'm not necessarily saying that's bad, but it is very threatening. And the best part is, it is my impression that Byron is completely unaware of how threatening he is, especially given his desire to not be. Also, really quick aside here. Isn't it amusing, the parallels between Byron and Buster? I'll probably talk more about that in the future as it comes up, but if you think about it, both of them are fully committed to my people. Both of them firmly believe in their particular dream for the future. Both of them very strongly have a us versus them mentality. The only major differences are their specific ideologies, their ambitions. In his case, he wants to create a separate nation of telepaths, and in Buster's case, he wants to create a dominant nation, a homo superior of telepaths. And the fact that Byron's methods are completely different than Buster's. I'm not saying they're identical or that there's any mirroring going on. It's just interesting to look at the two side by side like that. So there's one more thing, really, I want to talk about. Two more things, actually, excuse me. First thing I want to talk about is the motivations of the lone gunman. Now, there's actually a really, really good quote. This is paraphrased, a lone gunman who is sufficiently motivated, who is willing to kill a target even at the expense of their own life, cannot be stopped by security or armed forces or whatever. And that is true. You can get lucky, which is actually what happens in this episode. They get lucky, and they happen to, by circumstance, stop him from killing Sheridan. Twice, actually. But, it's a wonderful quote because it emphasizes what has to go into the mindset of someone who is willing to die in order to kill, which is pretty messed up when you really sit back and think about it. Which brings us to the motives of the gunman. Now, they dance around it, but there are three motives that are tossed out there for the gunman throughout the course of the episode, and I disagree with all three of them. I know. What I personally believe is that the lone gunman in this episode was a child who had his toy taken away from him. Now, I know that sounds really simple, but think about it for a moment. I am, of course, breaking it down a bit. He was someone who is in a cushy position with a cushy job, and I get the very strong impression that he was, shall we say, comfortable with being in a position of power. He would be a good example of the concept power enables. I'm sorry. I rephrased that because I don't agree with the statement that power corrupts. But what usually would be said there is that power corrupts. In other words, that he was always a corrupt person, by my estimation, but then he was given the power to abuse authority and did it. And liked it. And then someone decided to go after his bosses and shut down the regime that was enabling him to have what he wanted. And now he suddenly didn't have it anymore. And his life was ruined. Because he had had that taste of power and was unwilling to let go of it. He was a child who had his favorite toy taken away from him. I'd love to hear your guys' impressions and thoughts, because they never say definitively what his motivations are. Even the things he says are highly circumspect, or that's the wrong word, highly suspect, based on the circumstances of how he's presenting it and what he's talking about, all that fun stuff. Oh, you ruined me and you ruined my life. Well, that's not actually really a motive. I mean, I hate to point that out. It's more of a why you don't care about dying, not why you want to kill kind of a thing. But I digress. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on that one. Please feel free to share. As always, second point, Sheridan. Sheridan, this episode does a great job of approaching the complexity of the anti-politician. This is a phrase I don't get to use a lot. I've talked about it over in Dragon Age Origins, and wow, I think that might actually be it. An anti-politician is someone who is a good leader, someone who actually cares about their job, takes it seriously, wants to do the right thing. You know, they're morally aligned, they care about the nation, not just themselves. They don't want to just perpetuate the problems of political systems. They want to go forward and do it, and anti-politicians almost universally fail. No, this is true. This is not a joke. This is actually why I did not go into politics in real life. I had that choice pretty much right out of high school, and I said no, because anti-politicians fail. See, if you're an anti-politician who has no power, then you can't do anything. If you are an anti-politician upon whom power is thrust, like what happened with Sheridan, you have a gigantic target on your back. Now, they talk about this throughout the episode in many different ways. My favorite two examples, though, are the meeting where all of them are trying to expound upon Sheridan that he can't be a hands-on leader. Now, this is just one aspect of being an anti-politician. But Sheridan is very, very much an anti-politician. I've actually talked about this before. He is an anti-politics, anti-politician, right? He is the kind of person who wants to lead and who wants to do and who cares about doing a good job of it. He doesn't want to get mired with all that political crap, as best as he can avoid it. And he's not willing to compromise on it. He is willing to say this is the right thing to do, even if it leads him into a pit with a bunch of other corpses. That's just Sheridan. That's how he is. And I do admire him for that. But I like how the episode doesn't present that as right. That's what I like about it. It would be too easy to show Sheridan as correct in this case. Like, say he was Janeway, for example. Has to be correct. No, that's a joke. That's a joke. But you know what I mean, right? Too many fiction has someone make the morally correct choice, the morally right choice, when it is clearly the incorrect choice to make, and then it just works out. Now, it did work out in this case, but only for three reasons. The first I want to talk about is Garibaldi. Garibaldi, of course, is Garibaldi, and is Garibaldiing as Garibaldi wants to Garibaldi. And I love the bit where he actually talks to Lockley and says, we are here to protect him from himself. Which is also another compromise, by the way. Sheridan doesn't want to back down. Garibaldi wants to, and the others want to protect him. So Garibaldi does his homework and tries to figure all this stuff out. And yet the best part of all of this is for all of Garibaldi's sleuth work, which was all successful and all accurate, didn't actually do much. The one thing that Garibaldi did do was shave Sheridan right at the end by going after him in the Starfield, because he was the one paying attention. So he was able to save Sheridan. But all of that information didn't save him from the lone gunman. Not really. Second point of interest, if I may be. They had a completely wild set of circumstances in which a telepathic child, basically, a teenager actually, was able to, by incident, figure out what was happening, drag what was effectively his corpse to the meeting room, where Franklin happened to be to vouch for him, and then project upon them what was about to happen, also speaking for the first time in however long, in order to stop him. That is a hell of a series of coincidences to ensure that Sheridan does not get shot. And it still came close, despite all of that. My point is, Sheridan was right, but Garibaldi was also right. One lone gunman could have succeeded, if not for the random intervention of that kid, who, by the way, died in the act of doing so. At least I think he did. God, I actually don't remember all of a sudden. They never stated outright. I was always left the impression that he died, just like I was this time. So, an anti-politician who has power is the kind of person who is going to be constantly at risk. And circumstances or coincidence or even good planning, like the latter thing with Garibaldi and the Star Fury, can save that anti-politician's life, but each time it happens, it's a dice roll. Every single time. It's just a roll of the dice as to whether you're going to manage to successfully save them or not. And if you fail, well, they're gone, like so many others. I like that. I mean, I don't like that. I like the presentation of the episode. I actually hate that, to be blunt. I also love two little tiny tidbits before I cut off for today. One, they're like, oh God, we need to postpone the thing to get to the guy. And Sheridan says, no, I'm not going to postpone it. Let everyone know, and let this be a sign and a circumstance. Everyone's going to be aware that we are not cowing. Point of interest, because he says no, because he is an anti-politician, because he refuses to take the advice of the others and be more of a politician, his life is immediately put back in danger again. Second point, notice who stays with him in the bubble. 3 people are there total. Him, Delenn, and G'Kar. Something about that strikes me as immensely appropriate. All 3 of those people being there, and the 2 of them refusing to leave him, even as a Star Fury is going to shoot them to death. I like how Delenn doesn't say anything. She just walks up and says, no, if you're going to shoot him, no. And G'Kar, I found it interesting that he stayed, but very appropriate, very in character for him. I suppose that's actually all I have to say. I hope you've enjoyed our first episode of Season 5. We'll see where it goes from here, and I will see you guys next time.